What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Wednesday, January 8th edition of the Ship My Money Show. I'm your host, Adam Scherer. You can follow me on Twitter at ShipMyMoney DFS. 8-game NBA slate tonight. A lot of good DFS contests. $6 buy-in, 100K to first on FanDuel. Not going to be talking about that one, but actually 50K to first. Still a good tournament over there. $8 buy-in, 100K to first on DraftKings. Going to be talking about how I'm attacking that one on this show. Also, the 888, 250K to first is on DraftKings tonight as well. So a lot of good stuff to play. And as always, going to go through game by game on this show, looking at the exposures that I would have for the large field DraftKings tournament if the slate started right now. The most important takeaways aren't necessarily who I'm playing or who I'm not. Obviously, that is going to change between now and lock as a result of injury news, late swapping throughout the slate, even after lock. All that kind of stuff, but still being able to get a game-by-game breakdown, how I see things right now, things that maybe we need to be looking out for from an injury standpoint. So I'll hit on all of that as we go through each game. If you have questions, as always, feel free to throw them in chat. I will answer them as I see them if I have anything useful to say about them. So don't hesitate to do that. But starting things off here with Oklahoma City taking on the Cleveland Cavaliers, and this looks like it should be a great basketball game from a real life standpoint. It does also have some DFS appeal, although I'm not getting to it quite as much as I thought I would. But in particular, the Oklahoma City side here does look good. It's obviously a tough matchup against Cleveland. Like, this is a solid defensive team, one of the best teams in the NBA. But for both of these teams, it is an appealing matchup because even though the other team is good defensively, it just increases the likelihood that you're getting full minutes from players on two teams that are frequently involved in blowouts and as a result have lower average playing time for their main players than they would if every game that they played were competitive. This game has like a 1 to 2 point spread here. It's as likely to be competitive as anything or as any game. But also for the Oklahoma City side, and this is very different than the Cleveland side, Oklahoma City only has, I believe, 9 bodies on their active roster today. They have a lot of guys out on G League assignment. They obviously have some injuries as well, but no Brandon Carlson, who's not in the rotation anyway, but he's out. No Alex Caruso, who is typically in the rotation. No Usman Jang. No Adam Flagler. Obviously no Chet Holmgren. No Dylan Jones. No AJ Mitchell, who is a typical like 15, 16 minute per game guy, and no Nikola Topic. So they only have 9 bodies they can use here. We saw this last game with Mitchell out as well. You got a lot of playing time from their main pieces. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander played like 38, 39 minutes in their last game. So did Lou Dort. Jalen Williams played about 35 minutes. Hartenstein played 35 minutes. So you're likely to see substantially increased playing time here from the main pieces on OKC because of, one, the matchup and the likelihood that it's a competitive game, and then two, just a lack of other bodies for Mark Daigneault to use. All of that being said, it does suck that this is the first game on the slate because you do still want to try and have flexibility to late swap throughout the slate so that you can take advantage of additional information, additional injury news, all of that. So I do use a little bit of a penalty on players in these early games, and I think that is probably one reason that I'm not getting quite as much of OKC as I kind of assumed that I would going into the day. But I'm getting to 20%. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander here. He's projected for 15% ownership. That obviously looks good given what I expect to be increased playing time for him. I'm not getting to as much of the other starters, but I do think they're still fine. 14% ownership coming into Isaiah Hartenstein at 7,100. 21% coming into Lou Dort at only 4K. Shooting guard, small forward eligible, probably playing extra minutes, like I said. So I think those are both solid plays, but they're just not showing up in lineups for me right now, at least. Probably in part because they are getting ownership, but also just because I did knock their projection slightly just to account for the fact that rostering them does take away flexibility for me later on in the slate. Jalen Williams only getting 5% ownership at 8,300. Still a high upside play. Could play, upper 30s. I projected him for 35.5. Aaron Wiggins has taken on a bigger role off the bench lately. I think he's likely to play low 20s in minutes here. He's only 3,200. Obviously not a great fantasy point per minute producer, but does project as a pretty good point per dollar play. So he's getting 12% ownership. Cason Wallace played like 34.5 minutes last game. He is getting 11% ownership. I didn't get much, but again, I think any of those main like 6 pieces for Oklahoma City are viable plays, even if I'm not get into them a ton right now. I still think that, for all the reasons I said, they are pretty interesting. 35 minutes last game for Wallace, just shy of 39 for Dort and SGA, 35 for Williams, 35 for Hartenstein, 20 for Wiggins. Isaiah Joe played 17. Jalen Williams played 8.5. Kenrich played 12. But really, there's like 5-6 guys here on Oklahoma City that I think are solid enough plays. Also, how much value opens up between now and lock will also impact like how much you want to get to somebody like Aaron Wiggins, for example. Potentially makes it even easier to get to somebody like SGA. On the other side here for Cleveland, everything I said obviously about the game being competitive and all of that applies to Cleveland. But working against Cleveland is that they are probably actually getting healthier for this game. I haven't seen shoot-around updates, but Isaac Okoro and Sam Merrill both went through full contact practice yesterday. They're both listed as questionable. For now, I'm assuming that they're going to play. My assumption was that Dean Wade remains in the starting lineup, but I did give minutes to both Merrill and Okoro. And we've seen Cleveland, even in competitive games this year, run pretty flat rotations. If you go back 3 games ago, they beat the Lakers by 12, but that's a game where everybody did play all the way down to the buzzer. There was no garbage time. They didn't, have any subs coming in off the bench at the end. Donovan Mitchell played the most minutes on Cleveland with 32.2. I projected him for 33 here because this does feel like a game where you would expect to get as many minutes as you're really ever going to get from guys on Cleveland. But at the same time, it becomes really difficult based on what we have seen them do in competitive games this year and the fact that they are likely getting 2 rotation bodies back. It just becomes really difficult to give a ton of minutes to these guys unless you're expecting them to not, to shorten their rotation, which hasn't been what they've done this year. I mean, we've even seen Ty Jerome getting, even before Sam Merrill's absence, you were getting, 6 minutes from Ty Jerome when he easily could have been a DNP. So I didn't project any minutes for Jerome tonight, but I did give minutes to Okoro. I gave minutes to Niang. I gave minutes to Merrill. I gave minutes to, obviously to LeVert and Wade and all these guys. So it does become difficult to just say, I think Donovan Mitchell plays 36 minutes once you're starting to take away minutes from other guys. If you're going to go that route and say, this is a competitive game, I think he plays 35, 36 minutes, like maybe we've seen against Boston earlier this year. You then have to say, okay, but I think that means Sam Merrill's cut out of the rotation or Isaac Okoro is not playing, even if he's healthy. And that just hasn't been the approach that Cleveland has typically taken this year when they've had the opportunity. So projecting 33 minutes to Mitchell is still more than normal as far as Donovan Mitchell goes this year, but it's less than you would typically project to somebody of Mitchell's caliber or Evan Mobley's caliber in a game that is as likely to be as competitive as this one. So 10% ownership coming into Mobley. I got the 3%, 2% coming into Jared Allen at 6,400. I'm right there. Harris LeVert getting 1%, Mitchell getting 4%, Garland getting 3%. There is plenty of tournament upside with these guys just because there is some chance that, I'm wrong and Mitchell does play 35, 36. But that being said, using a Sims tool like I did to build these lineups and figure out what lineups I'd be playing, it does factor in that there's volatility there. If I say Mitchell's going to play 33 minutes, it's not just treating it as if he plays 33 minutes every single time. It's saying, sometimes he plays 35 minutes, sometimes he produces at a higher rate than usual. And all of that being said, he's still just not showing up in lineups for me. So it is difficult to get to Cleveland just because of the tendencies that they have in their rotation. Whereas on the other side, you have a shorthanded Oklahoma City team that is likely to be playing their guys a lot more minutes than they usually do here in this matchup. Chicago taking on Indiana. For the Bulls, we have a relatively clean injury report, at least as far as Q tags go. Torrey Craig is out. I would assume New is out. A few other guys that are never in the rotation are out. Nobody questionable for this one, though. I'm not getting too much. Neither is the field. Patrick Williams getting the most ownership at 7%. His playing time has been up lately. We saw 35 minutes 2 games ago, 34 minutes last game. He's only $4,500. I projected 32 here just because I do still expect there to be some volatility. Foul trouble still exists. Blowouts still exist. You probably just get some games where Patrick Williams plays a little bit less, but clearly not on any sort of minutes restriction anymore. Decent point per dollar play at 4,500. Lonzo Ball's playing time has ramped up as well. He played 24 minutes last game. We had seen 26 in an overtime game recently where, just physically he was allowed to play 26. We saw 25 in another game. So I think expecting around 24 minutes from him makes sense. He's only $4,100. I'm getting the 4%. there is just some other value to get to elsewhere on this slate. And then also, again, this is a 7 p.m. game. So all of these guys just look slightly worse than they would if this were a later game because of wanting to maintain what flexibility you can. Basically, when I say that, for anybody that isn't totally understanding, just think about it. If you have two guys, one of them at 7 o'clock, one of them at 9:30 in the last game, and they're the same price and the same projection, you would just want, and same ownership, like if everything were equal, you would want the guy in the last game just because it keeps that roster spot open. So if you get a surprise scratch or you just get guys ruled out after the slate starts, you can swap for the injuries. If you get, somebody doing really well in your lineup at low ownership, you can rebuild your lineup to maximize projection at that point. So it's just there's value in maintaining flexibility, all things equal. So it's basically kind of just a tiebreaker there, but that does work against these guys. This game does have a very high total though. So, everybody here sub 10% owned. Williams, Ball, Giddey, Levine, Vooch, White, I think all viable options as far as low owned, high upside guys. But there's a lot of bigger priorities on the slate. On the Indiana side, we do have Q tags that have the potential to really change this slate. Tyrese Halliburton is questionable. Miles Turner is questionable. Midday downgrade with an illness. Typically, lately, it has seemed like that means guys aren't going to play, but I have him in for right now. It is the 7 o'clock game, so I'm not overly concerned. Like, we'll get that information before lock, or at least I would hope so. But, if Halliburton's out, obviously it opens up TJ McConnell at 3,800 is one of the best plays on the entire slate. If Miles Turner is out, I actually don't know what they would do. I don't know if they would go to Thomas Bryant as the starter at 3,200. I don't know if they would go to Obi Toppin as the starter at 3,700. Either way, those guys, one or both of them, would start looking like better values. You would probably also get more playing time from Pascal Siakam and Jarris Walker if Miles Turner were out. So it would open up some value in the front court on Indiana. And then, again, Halliburton, if he's out, it's just massive. Nembhard would look better as well. That's one that we should definitely keep in mind going back to last year. I don't think we've actually seen it much this year, but when Nembhard has played without Tyrese Halliburton in the past, he has been basically an entirely different player than when he plays with Halliburton. So that's something else to keep in mind where, I think at 4,900, if Halliburton is in, Nembhard is just kind of a secondary play where he's probably playing 30, 31 minutes, but he's not going to be asked to do a ton. But if you take Halliburton off the floor, Nembhard looks a lot better, especially if they don't start McConnell. Like, if Halliburton's out and they start Nembhard at point guard and they move like Ben Shepherd into the starting lineup, which is, I think, there's a decent chance they would do. That really is big for Nembhard. When he plays next to McConnell, he still takes a back seat. But when he's out there without either one of Halliburton or McConnell, it just becomes the Andrew Nembhard show, and he's a much better fantasy producer. So he would get a bump if Halliburton is out as well. Mathurin, probably plays a bit more at 5,800 if either of those guys are out, but especially Halliburton. So there's a lot that could change here. With those guys projected in, Pascal Siakam's down to $6,900. His playing time hasn't been great lately, but it is still Pascal Siakam. I have a difficult time projecting him to consistently play, 30 minutes or less, even though we have seen some pretty uninspiring, playing time lately. But 24 last game in a blowout, 34 the game before that, 32, 31, 31. He's averaged 31 minutes per game over his last 10. Probably could take like half a minute off him here. But at the same time, he's at 33 and a half minutes per game for the season. And I've mentioned it a lot on shows like this. Like, I think when you're projecting rotations, you obviously want to pay a lot of attention to what's happened recently, what rotations coaches are utilizing. But you also kind of want to keep an eye on the bigger picture too. And, is it likely that Pascal Siakam is just a 31-minute per game guy for the Pacers? And I don't think that's all that likely. So I think kind of balancing out where he's been lately at 31 minutes per game and where he has been overall this year at 33 and a half minutes makes sense. Again, I could cut this to like 32 probably, but I don't think I'd really want to go lower than that. He's getting 22% ownership. The price tag has adjusted for his recent playing time. So 6,900, cheap price tag, getting 22% ownership. I got the 25%. I'm getting the 15% Miles Turner right now. Like I said, he is questionable, but if he's in, this is a pretty nice spot against a fast-paced Chicago team, doesn't play defense. Turner's averaging 31 minutes per game. 6,400, just a pretty good price tag to get to him at only 5% ownership. High upside way to differentiate in your lineups. Halliburton, again, questionable, but 8,500. I think one thing you are going to see throughout this show is that if you're a high upside guard or player, and you're priced around Tyrese Maxey, there's a really good chance I'm getting over the field on you. That's not a knock on Tyrese Maxey. I'll talk about him when we get to that game. But you're getting what basically is happening is that Tyrese Maxey is going to get an absurd amount of ownership because he's just clearly one of the best plays on the slate. But he's at a price point where there's a lot of other guys that don't project as well as him, but their ceiling is just as high. And so, for example, I think I have Maxey projected for 53 DraftKings points. I have Halliburton at 45. If you use an optimizer, you're going to get Maxey every single time. But if you start factoring in range of outcomes and Maxey's getting 70% ownership and Halliburton's getting 8, it's going to tell you that, like, yeah, Maxey beats Halliburton the vast majority of the time, but it's not 9 times out of 10 or anything like that. And so you can differentiate by getting somebody like Halliburton that does still have a really high ceiling, even though he doesn't project as well. So you can see I'm not going crazy. I'm not putting all my eggs into the Tyrese Halliburton basket. I'm not saying like I'm going to play no Maxey and I'm going to play Halliburton everywhere that I would have played Maxey. Like I'm not doing that, but you can get a bit over the field on Halliburton here. McConnell at 3,800 does have a little bit of standalone value, even if Halliburton is in. He's only been averaging about 17 minutes per game lately. Playing time has been down a bit as Indiana has gotten relatively more healthy, but we do know he's a good point per minute guy. And if he just finds his way into a few extra minutes, it's not tough for him to end up being a really good play at 3,800. But clearly his primary value would come if Tyrese Halliburton is out. And then the same goes here for Nembhard at 4,900. Moving on to the Washington and Philadelphia game, lengthy injury report for the Wizards. A lot of moving parts in this one potentially. Bub Carrington is questionable. Kyle Kuzma questionable. He left yesterday's game early. Alex Sarr is questionable. Jordan Poole is out. Malcolm Brogdon is out. Marvin Bagley is out. Saddiq Bey still out for basically the season. Johnny Davis is out, so that is one bench guy that isn't available. Tristan Vucevic is out as well. He doesn't matter. But I'm assuming the starting lineup here is going, if Carrington and Kuzma are in, I am assuming that you're getting Carrington, George, Coulibaly, Kuzma, Sarr, like you did yesterday. If Carrington is out, I don't really know what they'll do. Maybe Jared Butler moves into the starting lineup. Maybe they shift like Kispert into the starting lineup. I don't really know what they would do. My guess is Butler. If Kuzma is out, you almost definitely get Champagnie in the starting lineup. So there are a lot of, if Sarr is out, you probably get Joval in the starting lineup, especially since Bagley is also out. Anthony Gill then probably becomes the back, or Rashawn Holmes is probably then the backup center. Maybe Anthony Gill plays a little bit, depending how many of those guys miss. But for now, I'm going to just assume they're in. Emwald said, can you make what you're looking at any bigger for us mobile viewer fish? If I can, I don't know the answer. Whether I know how, the answer is definitely no. I have tried in the past to make it bigger on the screen and have no idea how to do that. Couldn't figure it out. So unfortunately, the answer is no, not because I don't want to, just I have no idea how to. Or I guess I could actually just I could zoom in on the screen, I guess. I don't know if does that make it better or worse? Chat, let me know. Like, obviously, you can see less of the screen now, but it's more legible, I would assume. This seems like it probably works better. But yeah, let me know if that's better. Okay, cool. Yeah, so for Washington, I'm just assuming these guys are in, which if they are, there's not going to be a ton to like here. Jared Butler getting 16% ownership at 3K. This is a really interesting one. I had a ton of him yesterday, and it was kind of by accident, or it was very much by accident. But I thought he was a decent play, and I think he's a decent play today too. The thing that I do want to point out, though, and that I think is a concern from yesterday's game as well, he played 0 minutes alongside Bub Carrington in the first half yesterday. Carrington played like 17 first half minutes, give or take. Butler played 7. I think that like they're not completely mutually exclusive, where they never share the floor. But for the most part, I think if Carrington's on the floor, Butler probably won't be. And Carrington, if he's in, should play a lot of minutes here. So I do think that Butler may be going a little bit over projected in the industry. You had the Kuzma injury, and so the second half rotations were a little bit different, where Butler played some alongside Carrington. He also just played the final like 18 minutes, or whatever 21, like 14 minutes of that game, where it also turned into a blowout. So we got some garbage run. So definitely be careful just looking at yesterday and saying like, oh yeah, Jared Butler plays 21 minutes here. I think that would be pretty high. I have him at 17 and a half. I went to, I think 32 and a half. Yeah, 32 and a half on Carrington. So I have them playing a couple minutes next to each other. But if Kuzma's in, if Sarr is in, and if Carrington is in, I do think that you need to be somewhat cautious about Butler's minutes. Now, that being said, the Wizards are also 10-point dogs here, and obviously you can get garbage time again. Also, in looking at yesterday's rotations, one thing that could maybe change is Kispert played a ton. Kispert played like 32 and a half minutes and didn't even close because of garbage time. You can get rotations that change up a little bit where maybe you do get a couple minutes of Butler alongside Carrington if Kispert's not making shots and Kispert, is back on the bench. So it's not set in stone that he won't play any minutes alongside Carrington. There is still some upside for him, and he is 3K flat. But he is in an early game. He is taking away some of your flexibility later on. And there are a lot of good mid-range plays on this slate too, which is kind of the problem that you saw yesterday. Like I said, I ended up with a ton of him. And so it was like, oh, cool, I got 25 points at 3K. But then, Jason Tatum wasn't great. LeBron wasn't great. Davis wasn't great. These guys that I was able to get to because I had 3K Butler didn't really outperform like Trae Young, or just flat out didn't outperform Trae Young and some of the other, 9K-ish guys. And so I would have been better off just having somebody that got more raw points. So like you run into that problem as well, although you do have plenty of payoff options on the slate. So I think Butler's fine, but at this ownership, I'm not getting to him. Wouldn't fault anyone for getting there. I don't think it's a horrible play or anything, but I do just want to kind of point to last night's. The first half rotation yesterday was extremely pessimistic for Jared Butler. The second half rotation was much better, but the second half rotation included Kyle Kuzma being out and garbage time. So the truth's probably somewhere in the middle there. And like I said, expecting around 18 minutes makes sense. Kyle Kuzma, if he's in, is only 6,200. No Jordan Poole means a lot of usage for Kuzma. He is probably playing around 30 minutes or so. If this were a different slate where you had not as good of mid-range plays, I think Kuzma would look a lot better. But as is, it is tough to prioritize him. But he does have a high ceiling at only 6,200. Now, on the Philly side, this one is going to have a lot of plays that we want to get to and that the field's going to get to. And we are waiting on news here as well. Andre Drummond is questionable. Joel Embiid is out. Paul George is out. Kyle Lowry is out. KJ Martin, Jared McCain, they are out also. I did not project Andre Drummond in. If he is in, then it changes this a bit. I think he would probably start if he's in, since Paul George is out as well. And you would probably get a starting lineup of Tyrese Maxey, Kelly Oubre, Caleb Martin, Yabusele, and Drummond, in which case Drummond at 5,100 looks very good. I think he probably should be more than the 7% owned if he is in and starting. If he's coming off the bench, then 7% makes more sense. But if he's out, I truly have no idea who's starting in place of Paul George. I projected Justin Edwards because he has been ahead of Council and Gordon in the rotation. But it could be Council, it could be Gordon, it could be Reggie Jackson, it could be somebody that I don't even realize is on the Sixers at this point. But with Drummond projected out, the way I projected it basically is Justin Edwards to start and play like 26 minutes. And then I went around 16 minutes to all of Council, Gordon, Jackson. So like none of those guys popped up. If you in the 44,000 entry $8 tournament on DraftKings wanted to roll the dice on one of them and just hope that you hit the right guy, then it's not like it's a horrible idea, but I don't think it's super necessary on this slate. As you can see, I only got to 2%. This is out of 100 lineups, so 2 out of 100 lineups with Justin Edwards at 3,100 and no projected ownership. So I just don't think it's something that really shows up. Big facts that any Ricky Council, if Drummond is out or even if he's in, just covered that. Like I played Council some last slate, but they once again went to Edwards ahead of him. And looking at Edwards a little bit more, it's not what I expected to see, because he kind of just came out of nowhere and started getting some fringe rotation minutes for the Sixers. He was a very, very, very highly regarded recruit out of high school, went to Kentucky, and then just wasn't drafted, and now he's with the Sixers. So there is some underlying talent there. And so far he has been ahead of these guys in the rotation. So if Drummond is out and Council starts, then yeah, play some Council. If Edwards starts, I think, play some Edwards probably. If they go to Gordon or Jackson, you could roll the dice on them too. But you do have plenty of other value elsewhere on this slate too, I think. So probably not a huge priority there one way or the other. The plays that I think are bigger priorities, at least for the field, Yabusele at 5K. I expect him to be starting one way or the other. But if Drummond is out, obviously that's even better for him because he's not contending with Drummond for rebounds. It makes his minutes even safer. We saw him play 36 minutes last game. Bono was a straight backup to him. I expect that you'll see that again here. And it is a good spot against Washington as well. So 32% ownership. He is one of the chalk D pieces that I would still be getting a lot of. I'd be over the field on him even at that 32% ownership right now. And the power forward eligibility helps that a lot. Similarly, with Kelly Oubre, he's only $5,100. There's just not going to be that many pivots away from him in that price range that give you a similar range of outcomes. Like I was talking about with Halliburton and Maxey, Maxey obviously looks great, but when you start talking about guys priced between 8K and 9K, there's no shortage of other players around them that can just go get 60 fantasy points, even if their median projection is lower. You see on the screen, I have Oubre projected for 35 DraftKings points. He's capable of getting, 45, 50. There's not really 5K guys that can do that, especially at low ownership. Like if you find other 5K guys that can do that, they're probably pretty popular too. So kind of eating the chalk on Yabusele, eating the chalk on Kelly Oubre. Oubre probably playing 37, 38 minutes or so in a really good matchup with no George, with no Embiid. It's just very, very difficult, I think, to get away from that. Maxey, I think, again, also is great, but you do just have more pivots to him. Jorge said, intrigued on your 20% Maxey. Who's your pivot from Maxey? I'll hit on them as we go through the show, but I think most likely it's just a variety of guys. I already talked about Halliburton, where I'm playing like 15% of him right now instead of the field's 8%. I probably have more Harden than the field. I haven't looked too closely at anything else, but just going to those other guys that, they project quite a bit behind Maxey from a median standpoint, but from a range of outcome standpoint, they're not massive underdogs to him at the same rate that ownership suggests that they would be. And then when you are playing Maxey, you're going to probably want it to be in lineups where you have some lower owned guys in there. If I look at Maxey lineups, I can try and quickly take a look at just kind of how the ownership looks elsewhere in the lineup. You can see this one has Zubats at 7%, 1% owned Chris Paul, 6% owned Avdia, 2% owned Harris, 9% owned Harden. So you can see these lineups have some really low owned guys. Chris Paul again, Harden again, Harris again. And that's going to be the approach probably that you want to take with somebody like Maxey. And the thinking on Maxey here, again, it just doesn't have anything to do with Tyrese Maxey himself. It's that you're still trying to beat 44,000 entries. And some plays are going to be easier. Some plays that look really good are going to be easier to find pivots to than others. And that's just what you're seeing here, where it's tough to find lower owned guys with a similar range of outcomes to Yabusele or to Oubre. With Maxey, you kind of have a little bit bigger bucket of guys. And especially if you kind of talk within $1,000, give or take, of that price point. Again, I don't know exactly who I'm getting to, but you have Cade Cunningham on this slate. You have Barnes, you have Quickly, you have Barrett, you have Brunson, you have McCollum, you have Murray, you have the other Murray. You have Dame. Not saying that I'm playing all of those guys, but you just have this really big bucket of players where if somebody says to you at midnight tonight, "Oh, that player went for 60 fantasy points," you wouldn't think twice about it. So that's that's kind of the thinking there. Is it's just going to be a little bit easier to find pivots to Maxey, and then also because of how useful pieces like Yabusele and Oubre are, and how much ownership they're getting, a lot of lineups are going to have both of those guys. Then you put Maxey in there, and it becomes really difficult to differentiate from the field. So your lineups are going to look a lot better the more Maxey you play. They're going to project better, but you're just trying to balance that ownership and projection. So I'm still playing, a nice chunk of Maxey at 18%, but just not as much as the field. I think I screwed this up. Okay, yeah, so that's back to what I had, 23% Maxey. And it's just, you can, it's trying to make money as opposed to be right. If you play Maxey, let's say you just play Maxey everywhere, and he has a big game, he scores 60 fantasy points. You're still then competing with 31,000 other Tyrese Maxey lineups. Whereas if you make those pivots and Maxey just has a mediocre game, and a couple of those guys beat him, you're already down to playing against like 10,000 lineups, and you're just going to make. I don't want to say you're going to make more money over time by not playing Tyrese Maxey in this spot, because you can play plenty of good Tyrese Maxey lineups too. But just in general, making moves like that and keeping in mind that you win money for getting points that other people don't have, more so than just getting the points that everybody else is getting. You're just going to make more money. So Maxey, again, really good play. Just pay attention to what the rest of your lineups look like. Caleb Martin at 4,900. Again, 29% ownership. I think that he's a clearly good value. I projected him for 37 minutes here. If Drummond is in, I'll probably take a minute or so off of him, but he's going to play a lot one way or the other. Not quite as good a point per minute guy as Oubre so far since the start of last year, without Embiid or George on the floor. Oubre at 0.89 DraftKings points per minute. Yabusele at 0.87, Caleb Martin at 0.74. So a little bit of a drop off in point per minute production, similar price point. So I am prioritizing Yabusele and Oubre over Martin. But again, Martin projects pretty well for his salary also. And then you just get down to the fringe pieces for Philadelphia, which whoever's starting in Paul George's spot, I think is playable. Again, if Drummond is starting, he actually looks really, really good. Honey Badger said Edwards was the number one player in his class at one point, watched all UK games, and he looked shell-shocked most of the time. Glad to see him getting it together. Yeah, like I don't follow college, and I was really surprised to see the pedigree he had. Like, when you look at the pedigree he had, and then the fact that he didn't get drafted, and he just like unceremoniously ended up on the Sixers, I just assumed there was some sort of like character issue or something where teams were just like, yeah, we're not drafting this guy or something. Or Kentucky was like, yeah, we're not playing this guy. I didn't, look into it to see if there was anything like that, but that's just like, that's how it looked, was like this super talented guy just fell off the face of the earth and nobody wanted him anymore. Moving on to Detroit taking on Brooklyn. For Detroit, we once again do not have Asar Thompson. We do not have Jaden Ivey. So I'm assuming we get the same starting lineup with Cunningham, Beasley, Hardaway, Harris, and Duren. Your center minutes should be split between Jalen Duren and Isaiah Stewart, somewhere along the lines of 27 for Duren, 21 for Stewart, give or take. I went 26.5 for Duren. Tobias Harris, I'm getting quite a bit of because he's only projected for 2% ownership at 6K. He should see increased playing time with Noah Sar Thompson. We saw 37 minutes from him last game. His playing time in general has been up lately because of injuries. Fontecchio had been out. Ivy obviously has been out for 3 games now. And then now you have Asar Thompson out as well. 35, 36, 34, and 37 minutes for Harris in his last 4 games. Maybe this ownership number comes up, but if not, I like using Harris as a way to differentiate. I think, if you were paying attention, you saw that he was in a lot of like Tyrese Maxey lineups, for example. He's somebody you can use as a direct pivot, $1,000 more or $900 more to Yabusele or Oubre. You can play him alongside those guys to differentiate. You can use him as a pivot to Caleb Martin. So if this ownership stays as low as it is, I do like getting to Tobias Harris. If it comes up, I think that I'll still play him some, but I would play a little bit less. Cade Cunningham, 23% ownership. I'm only getting to 9%. I do like him here for all the same reasons I said last slate. He has averaged a little bit more playing time without Jaden Ivey, averaging around 38 minutes or so in regulation in games Ivey's been out this year. And then the other big thing is that he sees an increase in usage rate, but he also sees an increase in assist percentage. A lot of times you see those stats negatively correlate when a player or a teammate is out. In Cunningham's case, he just has the ball way more, and he's deciding what to do with it on pretty much every possession. So he's a very, very, very high upside play. I think the downside here, or not even downside, but probably the reason that I'm not getting as much, is that he is getting 23% ownership here. And there are just so many good high upside mid-range plays that are less expensive than him. And it's really what you saw last slate. I played a ton of Cunningham. It felt really good. Like, he's smashing. He scored, I think, like 57 DraftKings points. And it kind of put you at a disadvantage because Tyrese Maxey ended up with like 52. Anthony Simons ended up like over 50. I don't remember specifically all the guys that went nuts, but there were a lot of guys where you could have just saved $1,000 and gotten basically the same production. And I think you do have that same risk on this slate. And then you have 23% ownership coming into Cunningham where, I can save some salary there, maybe go somewhere else. Anthony said Eric Gordon is starting. So yeah, I assume he's going to play like real minutes here. He most recently, trying to see how many minutes he's played in recent games. He played 27 minutes 4 games ago. So New Year's Day, he played 27 minutes. I'll probably end up projecting like 27, 28 minutes to him. He is 3K flat, shooting guard, small forward. So he's going to look like a pretty good value. Drummond is doubtful. Halliburton's playing. Turner is out. So obviously I won't be playing Miles Turner. Toppin's going to become a decent value, probably. Thomas Bryant, potentially, depending on what that starting lineup is. Maybe they go to Jarris Walker. But again, whoever's starting there is going to look at least decent. I would prefer it be Toppin or Walker because they have power forward eligibility. Trying to think if there's anything else really to touch on with that Indiana news. If Pascal Siakam starts at the 5, so like if they start either Toppin or Walker, if they don't start Thomas Bryant in place of Miles Turner, I think probably projecting a few more minutes to TJ McConnell makes sense, which would make him kind of interesting at 3,800, assuming that the ownership's pretty low. Okay, that's moot because Thomas Bryant's starting. So 3,200 Thomas Bryant, it's going to be a good value. Keep in mind there is a lot of opportunity cost at center, but he's a good point per minute guy. I assume he's playing like at least mid-20s, so he's gonna look good. And that does kind of keep everybody else in their roles where like Toppin still is going to look better than he would if Turner were in, because I assume Bryant plays fewer minutes than Turner would have. But what I was getting into with guys shifting down positions isn't going to be as much of a thing because they're obviously giving a nice chunk of minutes to Thomas Bryant, or at least that's the plan. So Bryant and Toppin both look better without Turner. Halliburton is in. Gordon, as mentioned, starting. He's going to look like a good value at 3K as well. Not getting to much else from Detroit. Talked about Cunningham. Jalen Duren is your just typical high upside center with a lot of volatility. Maybe I get a little bit more of him now that Turner is out, but then again, that probably kind of just gets reallocated to Thomas Bryant at center. But Duren is the type of guy that just in general, I like targeting in large field tournaments because there is volatility in his playing time along with his production. His average playing time for the season, he's only averaging like 25 minutes per game or so. But he's just had a lot of games where he's in foul trouble, and that happens relatively frequently. But if he can avoid foul trouble, you can still get those 30-minute games where he just grabs 16 rebounds. So at 5,900, you kind of have a dropping price tag here, and somebody that is a very high upside play. But it's still just going to be difficult to prioritize him. Field is not getting to anything else here. Hardaway, Beasley, both 1% owned. Nothing that really stands out there. On the Brooklyn side, Ben Simmons is doubtful. Still no Cam Johnson. Still no, I don't know what's happening on my screen. Still no Cam Johnson. Still no Cam Thomas. No D'Angelo Russell again. I'm assuming we get the same starting lineup that we did last game. Daron Sharp is questionable. That matters just because if he's out, you're probably going to get a couple extra minutes from Claxton. And then you also just start to get like a really short Brooklyn team. But assuming Sharp is in right now, he's playing all the backup center minutes behind Claxton. I assume we get the same starting lineup with Keon Johnson, Zaire Williams, Tyrese Martin, Noah Clowney, and Claxton. If that is the case, Tyrese Martin's getting the most ownership here at 23% at 4,600. I didn't get to him. I do think this ownership number also comes down now that you got Eric Gordon at 3K, now that you have Bryant. Like, you're just getting value that is the actual minimum, as opposed to 30 minutes of Tyrese Martin at like a mid, kind of not that cheap price. So I do think the ownership comes down. He is probably going to play about 30 minutes. He's certainly somebody that has some value at this price, but I don't really like him at that ownership. Noah Clowney, 4,400, probably playing about 30 minutes here. And those minutes, I think, are even safer if they're on Sharp or to end up getting out, because then you probably are getting some Clowney backup center minutes also. But he has power forward eligibility too, which is nice. So I'm pretty close to the field there at 15%. Nobody else getting more than 5%. If you want to mix in some 5K, Zaire Williams, $6,100 Claxton, especially if Sharp were out, $4,400 Sharp. Any of those guys have ceilings, but nothing that really stands out. Keon Johnson's up to 5,800. I think he probably plays the most minutes on the team, and should have the ball in his hands a lot, given that they don't have much scoring or playmaking on this team. but it just is still a tough slate to be paying close to 6K for Keon Johnson, given the amount of value out there and the amount of high upside guards as well. Before we move on to the Toronto and Knicks game, reminder to sign up for Endgame Syndicate using the link in the description below. That's the site that I started with Utica, Nerdy Tanner, and Brick75. Our goal over there is to help you maximize your abilities, make as much money as you can at DFS, catering to your strengths, helping you out. We all approach DFS in a different way. We've all had our various levels of success doing it our way. And so there is somebody that you're going to be able to learn from that'll speak your language, that thinks about things the same way you do. Yuta, very, very heavy into just knowing the sports that he plays and seeing angles that most other people don't. Nerdy is a very good programmer, very data and math driven, as is Brick. I'm kind of in the middle between those guys. Can't program for shit. Don't know sports probably as well as Yuta does, or at least how to apply it to DFS. But kind of take the best of both worlds and have had some success with that. So we have a bunch of different evergreen videos, instructional videos up on the site. Also have a very good Discord with some good players in there, in addition to us bouncing ideas off of each other, talking about different things that, I think if this had existed in the past would have certainly saved me a lot of time and money as far as just trying to improve my game. Most recently did a video with Brick and Nerdy talking about some just relatively basic math stuff that I was working on, looking at past contest data, using Excel, doing regressions in there. The kind of stuff where even if you're not a programmer and you don't have a great math background, you could probably pick it up and use it to improve your game. They have dug in. Nerdy and Brick just put out 2 videos on dupes in your Showdown or smaller slate sports. A lot of stuff like that, just to dig into and learn from. The ultimate idea being that you can cut down on some of your subscription costs, stop putting as much money out there to be good at DFS by being able to maximize basically spending less money elsewhere. So check that out using the link in the description below. Now moving on to Toronto and the Knicks. We do have important Q tags in this one. Karl Anthony Towns and Miles McBride are both questionable for the Knicks. For Toronto, though, nothing that matters. Jamison Battle and Jonathan Mogbo are both out. They are with the G League team. You do have RJ Barrett back. He came back last game. He was quote unquote limited to his normal playing time. So nothing really to hit on here. I think that this is an interesting team to target in tournaments just because of the talent. Nothing looks great from a median projection standpoint, but you just don't have any ownership coming into this team. 3% ownership coming into Pirtle, 3% coming into Quickly. They're both relatively inexpensive. You're probably getting 32 minutes or so from Pirtle. You're probably getting 33 or so from Quickly. This game does have some blowout risk, but if it really goes down to the wire, both these guys are probably playing a little bit more than I projected. So I do just like the upside that they give you at modest price tags and virtually no ownership, given how good they are. You can make the same sort of case for Scotty Barnes, but he's up to 9,300, so you don't have the same sort of inexpensive salary there. So I do think that Pirtle and Quickly in particular are just kind of interesting contrarian plays in tournaments, but nothing that stands out as a priority. On the Knicks side, good matchup for them, 121 team total. Power said Lillard was downgraded to questionable. Yeah, I missed that, so thanks for that. Just another piece of news that we're going to be waiting on in those late games. For the Knicks, I projected Towns and McBride in. If they're in, nothing looks great here. 10,100 for Towns would be fine. It is a good matchup. Obviously, he's very, very good. You are still locking up a center position, though, when you have Jokic questionable later, and you have Wemby later, you have Giannis later that are both center eligible. So that's probably why I'm not getting to a ton of Towns, but clearly a high upside guy. If he's in the lineup, if he's not, we had Jericho Sims get the start last game. He played a lot. Achua played 22 minutes off the bench. A couple months ago, Towns was out. Sims started, played 6 minutes. Achua played like 28. It's pretty volatile, but typically what we've seen from Tibbs in the past when he started Sims is that Sims does get a pretty decent amount of run. Sims isn't a good point per minute guy, though, so it mostly just has to do with how much Precious Achua should you be playing if he's coming off the bench. And the answer is not as much as I did last slate, that's for sure. But I would assume he's playing like mid-20s if Towns is out and he's coming off the bench. If Achua starts in place of Towns, then he's probably pushing 30 and will look really good, especially with power forward eligibility. But if these guys are in, nothing that looks particularly interesting. Also, if McBride is out, you probably are just getting increased playing time from the other main starters. That is generally the approach that Tibbs takes, especially when you're not on a back. But as is right now, nothing that looks great here other than your typical. They're the Knicks. They play a lot of minutes. They're in a good spot. If you throw one of them into a lineup, you have a high ceiling. Portland taking on the Pelicans in New Orleans. This should be a god-awful basketball game, but a good DFS game. For the Blazers, Denny Avdia is questionable. He only played 29 minutes last game, which was surprising. Played really well in the first half. Didn't do much in the second half. Tanked a lot of my lineups, but he's questionable along with Donovan Clingan. I have them both projected in for right now. If he is in, Avdia should be starting in place of Jeremy Grant again, who is out. So you should be getting a starting lineup of Simons, Sharp, Avdia, Kamara, and Ayton. If Avdia is out, I don't know what they'll do. They could go to Murray. They could go to a smaller lineup here with Scoot Henderson starting alongside Simons and Sharp. They could go to something else. But we have actually been seeing really, really condensed rotations from the Blazers. Like I said the other day, I didn't project it quite as condensed as they have been playing it. They've gone 8 guys in each of their last couple of games. I still gave Delano Banton 6 minutes. I didn't give Robert Williams any. But that still creates the opportunity for a lot of minutes for these Portland guys based on how they've been playing, where, last game you got 36 from Simons, you got 43 minutes from Sharp. The game before that, it was like 40 from Simons, mid-30s from Sharp. Avdia played 43 a couple games ago. There's a ton of playing time available for these guys. And so it does make them look pretty interesting. And Avdia is only projected for 6 to 7% ownership right now at 6,900. It doesn't feel great because that is a pretty expensive price tag, and he has the Q tag, and he only played 29 minutes last game. But this is still somebody that produces a little bit over a fantasy point per minute, and I think is likely to, on average, give you about 34 minutes here if he's good to go. And in the starting lineup, maybe he only plays 30, but he's also live to play 38. I think 34 is a very reasonable projection. So if that ownership stays where it is, I do like getting to Avdia. Shadon Sharp getting 18% ownership. I'm pretty close to that. I'm pretty close to the Fields 23% on DeAndre Ayton. Only 6,200 should give you around 33 minutes or so at center. Anthony Simons still only 6,500. High ceiling, high upside for him. So I like getting to all of Avdia, Sharp, Ayton, Simons. Kamara at 4,600 is a reasonable value too. Not the same sort of point per minute upside as the other 4 though. So not as big of a priority. But any of the starters for Portland do look at least somewhat interesting here. We've also been getting a lot of minutes for Chris Murray, who's 3,300. I only projected him for 20 or 21 here, but I do think that if Avdia is out, he starts to look like a pretty interesting piece as well. So we'll have to keep an eye on that. On the Pelicans side, DeJounte Murray is questionable. We just got nothing from Washington. So Kuzma, Sarr, Carrington, all still questionable. No other news for tonight that just popped up. For the Pelicans, DeJounte Murray is questionable. Zion Williamson is out. Trey Murphy is out. My guess, assuming Murray is in, is that Brandon Boston replaces Zion in the starting lineup, and you get a lineup of Murray, McCollum, Boston, Jones, and Messi. If that is the case, I am playing a ton of Brandon Boston, especially if he's only projected for 35% ownership. This is somebody that can play multiple positions. He can contribute in a variety of ways. He's only 3,400. He has guard and forward eligibility. And so he looks really, really good. If that ownership comes up to 60%, then my exposure probably comes down a little bit. If he's not starting, then obviously I'm taking a couple of minutes away from him. But assuming he's starting and getting 35, 40% ownership, he's going to look pretty good to me. Using him, and that exposure probably comes down a little bit too, now that you have Eric Gordon starting at 3K. There's no real reason that I would want 100% Boston and no Gordon. I'll probably balance that out a little bit as well. But either way, Boston, 0.9 DraftKings points per minute. Moving into the starting lineup, playing with Murray, I assume, playing with McCollum isn't ideal as far as point per minute fantasy production goes, but still just somebody that can contribute in enough ways that I'm not overly concerned about it. So far this year, with McCollum and Murray on the floor, pulling up Brandon Boston's numbers, only 0.67 DraftKings points per minute, so a bigger drop than I expected. He has only played 67 minutes with both of them. If you just put McCollum on the floor, he jumps up to 211 minutes, 0.87 DraftKings points per minute. I assume he's probably a 0.83, give or take, guy over a larger sample with those guys on the floor. So I like him one way or the other. Misi getting 6% ownership at 5,900. I think he's just another of these mid-range centers that has upside, but it's also difficult to prioritize him because the problem is going to be like you have Thomas Bryant for value. You either have Jokic or you have a Denver minimum salary center. You have Wemby. And then even in the mid-range, there's nothing that makes Misi like better than Ayton or better than uh Pirtle or better than Claxton or better than Duran. Like they're all just very similar, relatively low owned, non-priority, high upside guys. Misi firmly fits in that category. Zion being out is a benefit just because it makes it, Zion and Murphy being out, it does help to solidify Misi's minutes, but just kind of looks like a secondary play. Jake said thoughts on Robinson Earl. If he's not starting, I have a hard time wanting to get to him. My expectation is that if Boston starts, Robinson Earl plays like 17, 18, 19 minutes, and Hawkins plays around 20, Alvarado plays around 18, and then Javonte Green plays like a handful, like 4 or 5 off the bench. If Robinson Earl starts, that would obviously be a good sign for his playing time. I'd probably project like 24 to 26 minutes then. Maybe gets him into some lineups. The problem is he's not a great point per minute guy either. If he's coming off the bench, I have a really hard time wanting to get to him on this slate. He is at 0.85 DraftKings points per minute overall this year, 0.75 when he plays with McCollum. Arcathelza asked about Hawkins. Same kind of thing with Hawkins. Like I think Hawkins is kind of more interesting to me than Robinson Earl, just because Hawkins will go out there and chuck if they give him the opportunity. The issue with Hawkins, if they start Hawkins, I like Hawkins because that is a really good sign for his playing time. If they were to run a starting lineup out there of McCollum or Murray, Hawkins, McCollum, and just go with that small lineup, maybe that happens if like Avdi is out and Portland goes with Scoot, Simons, Sharp, and then you just get a matchup of point guards across the board. If that happens, then obviously Hawkins looks really, really good. He would still lose production because he's sharing the ball with Murray and with McCollum, and he needs the ball in his hands. But the minutes would at least look good in that scenario. The concern that I have with him is that recently they have pretty clearly not been wanting him and McCollum to share the floor. Now, that is a recent development. They've played alongside each other in the past, but it's tough for McCollum, Murray, and Hawkins to all be on the floor together. And if you look at their rotations in their last few games, it's mostly been Alvarado subbing in and out for Murray. They did close alongside each other, Alvarado and Murray last game. But mostly it's been them subbing in and out for each other. And then it's been McCollum and Hawkins in and out, and Hawkins really not playing a lot of minutes. So that's my concern if Hawkins is coming off the bench, is I think that he probably plays some minutes alongside McCollum. Like I projected him for, I think, 20. But it's just tough for all those guys to get enough minutes. Now, if Murray is out, then you probably, I guess, get Alvarado starting for him, but I don't know for sure. But Alvarado, if he started at 4K, would look good. If Hawkins started, he would look good. If Murray is out, obviously just opens up the potential for somebody like Hawkins to play a bigger sixth-man role. But with Murray and McCollum in and the way they've been running their rotations, I'm just concerned about how Hawkins finds enough minutes to be a good play when they still have other wings they can go to. You have Boston, you have Green, who hasn't really been in the rotation, but still a wing that can replace some of the Murphy minutes. You have Robinson Earl, that can replace those minutes. So if he's not starting and if Murray's in, I have a hard time just like giving Hawkins enough minutes to want to get to him. But if Murray were out, I start to become a little bit more interested, although I'd probably be more interested in Alvarado, assuming he starts. DeJounte Murray, Herb Jones, CJ McCollum, all like getting 5% or less ownership. Murray and McCollum both in that bucket of guys priced around Tyrese Maxey that could have big games, but they're not ones that I'm really getting to all that much. Herb Jones at 5,300, pretty fairly priced as well. Clippers taking on Denver. No Kawhi Leonard, who was ruled out earlier. So I assume we're going to get Derek Jones Jr. back in the starting lineup. I assume that we'll get a little bit more playing time for Chris Dunn as well. I projected 26 minutes to each of those guys. Norm Powell, I projected for 37. I went 35 apiece on Harden and Zubats. I love Ivica Zubats here. This is a center that I'm prioritizing today. Mid-range center I'm prioritizing. It allows me to be different. It allows me to then, play more popular guys like Yabusele and Oubre. I think a lot of the lineups that I looked at that had Maxey also had Zubats. there's a couple of reasons I like him a lot, and it's kind of like one if Jokic is in and one if Jokic is out. It works either way. So for one, we know that Zubats has just been playing really big minutes this year for the most part when the Clippers are in competitive games, and the Clippers just find ways to be in blowouts constantly. But this game has about a 2-point spread in Denver. It's as likely as any game to be competitive. And, we've seen Zubats play big minutes in those games. Like if you look at his average playing time for the season, it gets pulled down because there have been so many non-competitive games one way or the other for the Clippers. But he's frequently playing 35 plus in games that are competitive down to the wire. Now, if Jokic is in, you also want Zubats on the floor as much as he can be on the floor to match Jokic's minutes. He's played Jokic, I believe, 3 times this season, 39, 35, and 32 minutes. And the 32-minute game was a relative blowout where he lost like 4 minutes at the end. So you've seen him, as expected, on the floor a bunch in this matchup already. 3 games rather, 35 and a half minutes per game, 14 points, 12 rebounds, 4 assists. So it makes sense for him to be on the floor. They don't have, not that anybody matches up with Jokic, but they don't have any other real guy to go to. Like Mo Bamba is certainly not the answer. The flip side to that, if Jokic is out, obviously you're not getting the matchup with Jokic thing. You're getting the play against DeAndre Jordan / Zeke Naji / Dario Saric part of the equation. Like the biggest risk, I guess, would be Denver goes small and maybe is able to like shoot Zubats off the floor. But if Denver tries that, they're probably going to just feed Zubats against guys that are half his size and let him score, 20 points with 20 rebounds. Shooting guys off the floor doesn't work as well in practice as it sometimes is made out to be. So, especially when you're Denver and you don't really have a ton of good players. So, one way or the other, this looks like a very, very good spot to get to Zubats at very low ownership. No Kawhi obviously increases usage a little bit for whatever minutes Kawhi would have been on the floor. Derek Jones Jr., much lower usage guy than Kawhi. So I really, really, really like getting to Zubats at 7,700 here. I think he plays more than the industry seems to think he's going to play. I like the spot. Everything to me looks good for Zubats. James Harden is a pivot I'm using a lot to Tyrese Maxey. 36% of my lineups, Fields at 9%. Again, I prefer Tyrese Maxey if you're just asking me who scores more points. I have Maxey projected like 7 points higher, but Maxey's also projected for like 7 times the ownership. And James Harden's good. It's likely to be a competitive game where Harden plays more minutes than usual. I just like the ownership discount you're getting on Harden, and he allows me to get to some of the value pieces that are still really popular. Now, one other thing that could change, as we're seeing all this news break, the more just clear-cut, really good value plays you get, the less condensed ownership gets. So like when I ran all of this stuff and you had 70% ownership going to Maxey, you had 60% going to the other guys on Philly. Now you start mixing in, Thomas Bryant, you start mixing in some of these other value pieces, and that ownership all starts coming down to like 30, 40%. And you have a little bit more discretion as far as where you want to go. So like the flatter ownership gets elsewhere, in addition to just Maxey's coming down a little bit, then obviously I want to be getting to more Tyrese Maxey. The whole conversation right now is just going with the assumptions that Maxey is 7 times as popular as Harden or Halliburton or these other guys. So keep that in mind as well. If you get Maxey ownership going from like 70% to 45%, then I'm probably getting around 45, 50% Maxey, for example. So that matters as well. Norman Powell, I'm getting a ton, 13% projected ownership, 6,700. Shooting guard, small forward, probably playing a ton of minutes. He's another one that we've seen in competitive games, just giving you 38 plus minutes pretty often. 38 minutes last game out. Now you remove Kawhi's 22 minutes. There's nobody that is like clearly soaking those up. You take out Kawhi and you're getting a little bit more run for Dunn. You're getting a little bit more run for Jones. You're getting a little bit more for Porter, for Batum. But it's not like there's one guy just stepping in and taking all of those minutes, which means you probably get a couple extra minutes for Norm Powell as well. So I expect that I don't actually end up with 65% of him, but I do think he looks good. And then you do get some correlation here as well, where, this is something I think people don't really think about or talk about, but there is positive correlation amongst teammates as far as guys that will be on the floor to the end of a competitive game or would play overtime or whatever. Like in a game where Zubats plays more than 35 minutes, there's also a good chance that Powell's playing more than 37, Harden's playing more than 35. And they all benefit from that game being really competitive. So there is, that effect as well, where these guys are kind of tied together. Like when one of them plays their upper limit of minutes, they all probably are exceeding their median. So that makes them look pretty good too. Chris Dunn, 3,800, I do think is somewhat interesting, but I'm just having trouble getting to him. We did see his minutes basically get slashed with Kawhi coming back. He played like 12 minutes in the first game Kawhi came back. He started each half, but then didn't do anything else. Last game he played 21. Prior to Kawhi coming back, we had seen Dunn in competitive games getting around 30 minutes. I didn't go that aggressive here since you do also have Terrence Mann back, but you do have a free falling salary. That being said, still tough to get to him. Emerald said, "Do you like Vooch in a matchup against Thomas Bryant?" I like Vooch's matchup against Thomas Bryant. Yes, I still think he's going to be tough to prioritize. I still think he's in that bucket of like just really high upside center. The problem is he's $8,700, so he's $1,000 more than Zubac. He's what, 2,200 more, I think, than Claxton. He's almost 3K more than Jalen Duren. He's 2,200 more than Jakob Poeltl. He's 2,500 more than DeAndre Ayton. Like, you're just getting into that issue of it's an awkward price point, because then also, like, if you're able to pay up, he's a few $1,000s less than Wemby, Giannis, maybe Jokic if he's in. So yeah, I really like the matchup. I think he's still difficult to get a lot of in tournaments, but I certainly wouldn't be upset about whatever I do get to, because he should have plenty of success in that matchup. On the Denver side, I projected Jokic in for the purposes of this show. I most likely, if nothing changes between now and lock, I personally most likely will project Jokic out. I haven't completely decided. I did yesterday, but I thought that was a little bit more straightforward with the back-to-back midday downgrades. Today, I don't really know what to make of it, other than the Nuggets are home underdogs to a Kawhi-less Clippers team. They are 1.5 point dogs right now. So I don't know. I'm leaning towards Jokic not being in which case I would project him out and end up with, basically placeholders for Saric or Jordan, whoever ends up starting. From a strategy standpoint, if you are going that route, Saric, Jordan, Najee are all 3K centers on DraftKings, so it doesn't matter which one you use as the placeholder. On FanDuel, basically the same. Saric is power forward eligible at 3,600 and center eligible. Jordan 3,700, Najee 3,500. So what I would do is just project Jordan as the starter, even though it probably is Saric. And then it's easier to swap down to Saric if you're going that route. But I, just for the purposes of this show, left Jokic in because I didn't want to basically, it would affect the entire slate, and I didn't want to use that qualifier like 100 different times. So if Jokic is in, Denver isn't going to look all that great here. Jokic is 12.7, which is really, really expensive on a slate where you also have Giannis, you also have Wemby. Maybe you have Giannis without Lillard, which obviously would be even better for him. Westbrook has been starting. He's 6,700, giving you around 31 minutes. Triple-double upside anytime he plays. Obviously, he will look better if Jokic is out. Porter will look better if Jokic is out. Murray will look better if Jokic is out. If Jokic is in, Denver is just one of these basically correctly priced teams where if you throw one of them in a lineup, hope they have a ceiling game, great. You're different with a talented player, but there's nothing I'd be prioritizing. And then wrapping things up here with the Spurs at Milwaukee, where we do have plenty to get to because Jeremy Sohan is out for the Spurs. Karl-Anthony Towns, game time decision. Daron Sharp is out. So that's going to be extra minutes, most likely, for Nick Claxton. I need to figure out if they even have another backup center other than Clowney. Watford is out, so it's not him. Double checking the Nets injury report, but I definitely expect more playing time, an extra minute or two at least for Claxton here. So he's going to look a little bit better with no Sharp. Yeah, still no Watford. Off the top of my head, I don't even know what other centers they have. Cam Johnson's out, so obviously they're not going small with him. But I would expect either way Claxton to play more. I'm looking quickly at their roster. So no Watford, no Simmons, or we're assuming no Simmons, no Sharp. Yeah, they do not have another center on their roster. So the Nets without Sharp are going to look better in general because you're going to need to get Clowney back up center minutes now, most likely, which means more minutes for Tosin. It means more minutes for Tyrese Martin. It means more minutes for everybody because they're just really shorthanded. Whitehead's not even available. He's out. He's in concussion protocol. So the Nets have like no bodies. The Nets have Zaire Williams, Beekman is 2, Tosin is 3, Martin is 4, Clowney is 5, Wilson is 6, Keon is 7, Claxton is 8. So the Nets have 8 bodies tonight, unless we get news that they activate random people from the G League. So the Nets are going to end up being a team that you need to get to tonight, at least to some extent, because they have 8 bodies playing. So Zaire Williams needs to play more now. Tyrese Martin needs to play more now. Claxton needs to play more now. Clowney needs to play more now. They look better than they did when I ran this because you just got basically 20 minutes opening up that have to go to guys that were already being projected to play. Anthony said Clowney should be over 30 minutes in this case, right? I would think so. I assume, and again, this is off the top of my head, so maybe I realize something once I start projecting minutes, but I assume now Claxton is just playing 33, 34 minutes, maybe more. And then Clowney is playing all of the other center minutes plus a bunch of minutes at the 4. Conservatively, I would probably say 32 Clowney, 32 Claxton. But yeah, I assume Clowney's playing more than 30. Because basically what happened when I projected this, I gave I think 29 minutes to Claxton, I gave 19 to Sharp. You take Sharp's 19 minutes away, there's nobody to distribute those to that wasn't already getting at least 18 minutes. I think Beekman was the fewest minutes I had projected, and he was either 16 or 18. So you're redistributing 19 minutes to 8 guys that already were playing at least 18 minutes. You're just going to get a lot of minutes going to guys. So again, that is with the caveat that I can count and didn't miss somebody on the Nets roster. But I went down their roster on the NBA website, and they have 8 guys that right now are active. So they are going to be a bigger part of tonight's slate than I was hoping or than I thought earlier. Now looking at San Antonio, another team that's still going to matter. Castle's getting 22% ownership at 3,400. He played about 25 minutes in his start in place of Sohan a couple of games ago. He did not close. He can close. We've seen him average over 30 minutes per game overall as a starter this year. I projected 26. I do think there's some volatility here, but 3,400 is really cheap. So he does look like a good value play. Devin Vassell at 6,300. Shooting guard, small forward. He was a spot that I liked using to differentiate. Only getting 5% ownership. Likely playing 35, 36 minutes here. I think he looks good. Keldon Johnson, 5% owned at 4,200. Probably playing around 26 minutes. I think he looks fine. Chris Paul in lineups where I need a low-owned guy. I mentioned I was playing him with Maxey a lot, where if I'm taking on 70% Maxey, I'll pair him with 1% owned Chris Paul, and that helps me be different really, really quickly. Wemby getting 10% ownership. I'm at about 7%. So outside of Castle, I think that the Spurs are basically a team that you can use to be contrarian. Vassell being the guy, at least at the start of this show, that I like the most. And then finally, on the Milwaukee side, Chris Middleton is coming off the bench now. Taurean Prince will remain in the starting lineup. I went 25 minutes to Prince, 25 to Middleton, 24 to Green, 22 to Trent. I did cut Brook Lopez back to 26 minutes, which is the same as I gave to Bobby Portis. I had mentioned the other day that Lopez had not played a fourth quarter minute in 3 consecutive games. Then he did last game, but that was when Middleton was out. I still assume they are just kind of going to the lineup they've been using, where Lopez doesn't play as many minutes. Portis plays a little bit more. And obviously you have Middleton in there. Lillard is questionable. If he's out, you're probably getting Ryan Rollins moving into the starting lineup. Maybe you get Middleton back in the starting lineup. I don't really know what the reasoning for his bench move was. I don't know if it's they want him as a second scorer, and if Lillard's out, they're going to say, okay, well, now you can go be a primary scorer. I don't know if it was something else. So maybe you get Rollins, maybe you get Middleton. I'm not sure. Could be DeLon Wright. But definitely something to keep an eye on because it will open up some value possibly, but it will also make Giannis's projection go up. It'll make Trent look better. It'll make Green look better if Dame is out. So like I was talking about earlier with flexibility and using that as a tiebreaker, obviously only so much you can do on a slate like this where you have so much good value locking in the 7 p.m. games. I'm not saying that you should just forego all of the very clearly good 3K plays up here just so that you hopefully get a 3K play down here. But you do have very, very big question marks in the 9 o'clock game and the 9:30 game. So flexibility does help there. As is right now, Giannis is the only guy that I am really interested in from the Bucks. He's the only guy the field is interested in. I'm getting to 27%. Field's at 21%, 11-4, power forward eligible. I have him projected a little bit better than Wemby at a similar price point. His positional eligibility is better than Wemby since you can play him at power forward. On FanDuel, obviously, that's different because you can play Wemby there too. And blocks are worth more. So like Wemby is relatively better on FanDuel. But talking DraftKings here, Giannis is my favorite pay up option. He looks really, really good. He'll look better, of course, if Lillard is out. So definitely keep an eye on that. Not getting to any other Milwaukee, but if Lillard is out, you have $3,700 Trent, who would probably play more. $3,800 Prince plays more. $3,500 for Rollins. Lopez, I would assume, plays more if Lillard is out, just because of a trickle-down effect of minutes. You probably go back to what we just saw with Middleton out, where Lopez plays like 30-ish or something like that. So definitely a lot of moving parts here with Milwaukee. That's all I have for you for this one. Thank you for checking out the show. Don't forget to hit the thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel. All that stuff helps out quite a bit. Appreciate you guys checking it out. Good luck on your lineups tonight. I'll see you back here again tomorrow.